She smiled and said, "You always make me feel younger." I laughed it off, but in that moment, I knew I could never look away. It was one of those quiet summer afternoons where time seems to move slower, the kind of day where the air feels heavier and every sound carries a little farther. I had walked across the street to drop something off at my neighbor's place, nothing extraordinary, just a small errand. But that was the first time I met her. She opened the door, and for a moment, I almost forgot why I was even standing there. She wasn't what I expected. My neighbor had always mentioned his mom casually, as if she were just part of the background of his life. But here she was, a woman in her early 40s, graceful in the way she carried herself, confident in her posture, and yet there was something quietly vulnerable in her eyes. Her smile was warm, the kind of smile that felt practiced from years of politeness, but genuine enough to soften the space between us. She wore a simple blouse, sleeves rolled just past her elbows, and I noticed how the late sunlight filtered through the doorway, catching on the strands of her dark hair. A faint scent drifted toward me, vanilla, mixed with something sweet and homely, like freshly baked muffins cooling on a counter. We exchanged polite words at first. She thanked me for bringing over the package, and I replied with the sort of awkward courtesy I always seem to fall into around adults. But with her, it didn't feel like I was speaking to someone's mom. Her voice carried an ease, a softness, and when she laughed lightly at my nervousness, I caught myself staring longer than I should have. As she leaned against the doorframe, casually tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, there was a steadiness in her that made me feel oddly unsteady. She asked a few small questions, how school was going, if I was working anywhere for the summer, but even in those simple exchanges, I felt her attention in full, as if she wasn't just making conversation, but listening. Really listening. It was nothing dramatic. Just a short visit, a simple hello, a polite exchange. Yet as I turned to leave, I felt the strange weight of something I couldn't quite name. That moment, the way her presence filled the doorway, the way her eyes lingered just a fraction longer than expected, stayed with me. I told myself it was just because she was kind, just because she carried herself with a grace I hadn't often seen. But deep down, I knew. Something about her had stirred the quiet in me, and even then, I couldn't look away. It was a few days later when I saw her again. This time, not at the door, but outside by her car, arms full of grocery bags that seemed heavier than they should have been. I had just come back from a walk, and before I could think twice, I crossed the street. "Here, let me help you with those," I offered, already reaching for the 2 largest bags before she could protest. She gave me that same warm smile, but this time it carried something different, relief, maybe. "Thank you. I keep telling myself not to buy so much at once, but I never listen," she said with a soft laugh. As we walked toward the house, one of the bags shifted in her hands, and when I steadied it, my fingers brushed against hers. It was nothing intentional, nothing planned, but the pause that followed was undeniable. Just a heartbeat where neither of us moved, where that small spark of contact seemed louder than the rest of the afternoon. Inside the kitchen, she set the bags down with a sigh and pushed a strand of hair from her face. "You know," she said, glancing at me with a playful tilt of her head, "you always make me feel younger when you're around." The words were simple, tossed out like a joke, but I heard more in them. Something unguarded. Something she might not have meant to say aloud. I tried to smile it off, though my chest tightened at the sound of it. "You don't need me to feel younger," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. She looked at me for a moment, really looked, as though weighing whether to brush past the moment or let it linger. Finally, she laughed softly and shook her head, but the way her eyes softened told me that maybe, just maybe, she had been speaking more truth than she intended. We unpacked the groceries together, her passing items to me as I placed them in the pantry. The air felt different, heavier somehow. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers when she handed me a jar, the way her sleeve slipped down to reveal the delicate curve of her wrist. When I finally stepped outside to leave, the late sun painted the porch in gold. She stood at the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, watching me with a look that lingered. And as I walked back across the street, her words replayed in my mind, looping like a song I couldn't stop hearing. You always make me feel younger. It was light-hearted, yes. But it was also the first glimpse into something more, a softness behind her strength, a crack in the armor she wore. And though I didn't know it yet, that small moment would stay with me, long after the groceries were put away. The following weekend, the neighborhood gathered for a small barbecue. It wasn't anything grand, just a few folding chairs set out on the lawn, the smell of grilled food drifting into the warm evening air, children running around with sparklers while the adults chatted in circles. I didn't expect to notice her the way I did. But the moment I arrived, my eyes sought her out almost instinctively. She stood near the grill, laughing at something one of the neighbors had said, her hand lightly resting on the edge of the picnic table. She wore a light summer dress, nothing extravagant, but the way the fabric moved in the breeze seemed to carry her with it. I tried not to stare, yet every time I looked away, I found myself drawn back. It wasn't just her appearance, it was the way she carried herself, calm and attentive. When people spoke to her, she leaned in slightly, as if their words deserved her full attention. And when she laughed, it was quiet but rich, the kind of sound that made you forget what the joke had even been about. At one point, she glanced up and caught me watching her. Normally, I would have turned away quickly, embarrassed. But this time, I didn't. And neither did she. Her gaze held mine, steady and knowing, until someone called her name and she broke the connection with a small smile that felt like a secret only we shared. Later, as I helped carry a tray of drinks across the yard, she approached me. You don't seem like the type to enjoy these things, she teased, her tone light but her eyes curious. I shrugged, trying to mask the sudden rush of nerves. Maybe I just needed the right company. Her smile lingered for a moment longer than necessary, and I could feel the warmth of it even as she turned to greet someone else. Throughout the evening, it was like that, small glances, brief moments where the noise of the crowd faded and it felt like it was only the two of us. A shared look across the lawn. The light brush of her hand as she passed me a plate. The subtle pause in her breath when our shoulders grazed as we stood side by side watching the children with sparklers. Nothing was said, not directly. But in the spaces between words, in the silence stretched thin with awareness, something was building. And I knew, without wanting to admit it, that I was already in too deep. It was supposed to be a simple errand, returning a book I had borrowed from her son. The kind of exchange that should have lasted no more than a minute. But when she opened the door that evening, the sky already blushing with streaks of orange and purple, she asked me to wait. Come, sit for a while, she said, gesturing to the porch. The weather's too beautiful to waste. So I stayed. We sat side by side, the old wooden chairs creaking softly beneath us. The cicadas hummed in the distance, and the faint smell of jasmine floated in from her garden. For a while, we talked about ordinary things, the book, the neighborhood, even the weather. But soon, her voice shifted, taking on a softness that felt different. You know, she said, her gaze fixed on the horizon, people stop looking at you the same way after a while. You get older, and suddenly you're invisible. Her words caught me off guard. She spoke them with a light smile, but I could hear the weight beneath it. Her hand rested loosely on the armrest, her fingers tracing invisible lines in the wood as though searching for the right words. I used to walk into a room and feel like I mattered, she continued quietly. After my divorce. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still beautiful. The word lingered in the air, fragile, as if it almost hurt to say aloud. I turned to her, surprised not by her confession, but by the trust she had placed in me by sharing it. She wasn't looking for flattery, I could tell. She wasn't fishing for empty reassurances. She just wanted someone to hear her. You are, I said finally, my voice steady but sincere. More than you realize. For a moment, she looked at me, really looked, her eyes searching mine as if to test whether I meant it. Then she let out a quiet laugh, one that sounded more like relief than amusement. Thank you, she whispered. Without thinking, I reached out, letting my hand rest lightly over hers. The warmth of her skin against my palm felt grounding, steadying, like I was anchoring her in place. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers relaxed beneath mine, a silent acknowledgement that the moment mattered. We sat there in silence after that, watching the last threads of sunlight fade into the night. And though no more words were spoken, I felt the shift between us, something fragile, yet undeniable, had begun. The sky broke open late one afternoon, sudden and heavy with summer rain. I had gone over to return her garden shears I'd borrowed earlier that week. By the time I reached her porch, the downpour had already turned the street into a sheet of silver. She opened the door just as a gust of wind whipped rain across my shoulders. "You're soaked," she said, ushering me inside before I could protest. She disappeared for a moment, returning with a towel, pressing it into my hands. Our fingers brushed, and I caught the faintest tremor in her touch, or maybe it was mine. I dried my hair awkwardly, the rain drumming hard against the windows. The world outside blurred, leaving only the soft glow of her living room lamps. She motioned for me to sit, and I settled onto the couch. A moment later, she joined me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched, the cushion dipping slightly under her weight. For a while, we just listened to the storm. The sound filled the room, leaving no need for words. She tucked her legs beneath her, shifting slightly closer, her perfume, light and floral, threading into the air between us. I tried to focus on the rain, but every detail of her presence tugged at me, the way she tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear, the faint rise and fall of her breathing, the warmth radiating from where our bodies nearly met. "You know," she said finally, her voice low, "I used to love storms like this. But these days, I don't know. They make the house feel emptier." Her words lingered, heavy yet soft. I turned to look at her. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes were distant, as if following a thought too heavy to share. Without thinking, I shifted, my knee brushing hers. The contact was brief but enough to make her glance at me, startled, then softened. Neither of us moved away. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but fragile, delicate as glass. I wanted to say something, to fill the air with reassurance, but words felt clumsy compared to the quiet pull between us. Instead, I let my hand rest lightly on the couch, close enough that the space between our fingers could be closed with the smallest movement. She noticed. I could see it in the way her breath caught, in the way her eyes flicked down and back up. But neither of us reached across that last inch. We just sat there, the storm outside echoing the unspoken inside, something alive, something restless, waiting for the courage to be named. The storm passed, and the following afternoon the air carried that clean, rain-washed stillness. She was in the garden, sorting through a small box of wind chimes she had bought at a craft fair. I happened to be walking by, and she waved me over with a smile that seemed brighter than usual, as if the gray skies of the night before had left her grateful for the sun. "Could you help me hang these?" she asked, lifting the delicate chimes so they caught the light. "I've been meaning to, but I can't quite reach the hook." I agreed, taking the small ladder and steadying it against the porch beam. As I climbed up, I felt her presence just below me, watching. When I reached for the hook, the ladder wobbled slightly, and instinctively her hand caught my arm to steady me. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it lingered longer than necessary. I glanced down. Her fingers still rested on my forearm, and when she realized, she didn't pull away right away. Instead, her eyes met mine, not hurried, not embarrassed, but quietly searching. For a second, it was as though the world held its breath. When I finished hanging the chime, it tinkled softly in the breeze, a fragile sound that seemed to mirror the moment between us. I climbed down, and she laughed gently, brushing her hand along my sleeve as though to smooth away the tension. "You make even the simple things easier," she said. Then, after a pause, her voice softened, almost like a confession slipping out before she could stop it. "You really do make me feel younger." This time, the words didn't sound playful. They carried weight, sincerity. She looked away quickly, as though she hadn't meant for me to notice the truth buried inside them. I didn't answer, not with words. Instead, I let my silence carry everything I felt. I met her eyes, steady and unflinching, and for a heartbeat we both stood in that fragile honesty. She didn't laugh it off. She didn't retreat. Her hand lingered against my arm a moment longer before she finally stepped back, her breath catching in the quiet. The chimes above us swayed, their soft music filling the air. And though nothing more was said, something had shifted. It was no longer just small glances and chance touches. It was acknowledgement. Mutual, unspoken, but undeniable. The space between us was still there, yes, but it no longer felt empty. It felt alive, waiting. The days grew a little cooler as summer began to fade, but the evenings still carried that gentle warmth that made it impossible to stay inside. One evening, she invited me to sit with her on the porch. The sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson, the sun dipping low as if reluctant to leave. We didn't talk much at first. We didn't need to. The silence between us no longer felt uncertain, it felt comfortable, almost sacred. She brought out 2 mugs of tea, handing one to me with a smile that lingered just a little longer than usual. Our fingers brushed as I took it, and instead of pulling back quickly, she let her touch rest there, warm against mine, before slipping away. We sat side by side, the old wooden swing creaking gently beneath our weight. The world around us seemed to quiet, the distant sounds of the neighborhood fading into the soft chorus of crickets. I felt her presence more than anything, the gentle brush of her sleeve against my arm, the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, steady and calm. After a while, she sighed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've been a surprising part of my summer," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of wonder. "I didn't expect to feel seen again." Her words sank into me, simple yet profound. I turned to her, and in the fading light, I could see both strength and vulnerability in her expression. She wasn't trying to be playful or hide behind jokes. She was just being honest. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached out, letting my hand rest gently over hers where it lay on her lap. She glanced down at our joined hands, then back at me, her eyes glimmering with something unspoken. She didn't pull away. Her fingers curled around mine, delicate but sure, as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. Slowly, she leaned her head against my shoulder. The warmth of her cheek pressed lightly against me, and I could feel the steadiness of her heartbeat where our bodies touched. I exhaled, letting the quiet fill me, letting the simplicity of the moment become everything. We didn't need declarations. We didn't need promises. The truth was already there, written in the silence, in the closeness, in the way her hand held mine as the last light slipped beyond the horizon. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it settles in quietly, on an ordinary evening, and you realize it's been growing there all along.